Everybody, it's me, Andrew. Get out into nature and tune in for yourself. Resonate with the Earth's electromagnetic field via 432 hertz, the universal frequency. Balance out psychologically and emotionally, and further strengthen your brain and your heart's coherence as well. Get a plant based diet going for yourselves today and to nurture yourself right back into life. We are literally herbivores in our nature. Further balance out your physical body's pH level and to get with alkalinity. Then you can generate some static electricity. Send me some love telepathically. Set attention to your mind and set intention to communicate. That is all there is to telepathy. You are now tuning in to Great Days. So today I'm going to talk on dissolving away the ego or transcending the ego. Um, and I'm gonna go in depth on this, or I'm gonna make it very simple too. Um, and I'm pretty much just gonna talk on this. Okay, so the ego. What is the ego? The ego is pretty much it is pretty much a identification that we have found ourselves within, right? And the ego is supposed to be a sense of identity within, I want to say, a small dimension of our intelligence. But the ego, it doesn't actually exist, right? Only due to the fact that the ego is is like a delusional concept, right? That we have come to use for various different things, like the divisioning, right, of one source to deal with the pains of this, right? Now that is why we are within the ego, or we are so deeply caught in egoic ways, right? And once again, the ego is a sense of self-identity. Okay, so who you're identifying yourself as is your ego, right? And usually this is your body, your physical body, maybe some thought process could be called or could be identified with, and you see this as an ego, right? And we only created this. The ego doesn't actually exist, right? So who you're identifying yourself as, which for most people is the body or maybe some thought, doesn't exist. That identification is a delusion, right? Illusion or delusional concept. And we only created this because of fragmentation, right, of one source. So the one source went through the fragmentation process and we densified, and because of that fragmentation and identification, we got caught in the delusion of egoic living, right? Um, so what this basically means is that the ego, your sense of self-identity, it doesn't exist. It's a delusion that we have projected or that we have created to live within to deal with the fragmentation of one source, right? One consciousness, one awareness. And the ego, it's a very, very minute entity, right? It kind of it thrives on its own projections of fear and conflict and arguing and its very, very smallness or its minuteness, so the ego goes about projecting these things, um, and it kind of tries to feed off of them at the same time. So what the ego will do, what the ego will do is it's going to project all these different types of limiting, bounded fears, right? Or fears that come from limitation and bound, but that's only because the ego, it's an identification, and it's one usually with a bounded state, right, which is pretty much the body. um, but we aren't just the body, or we're not just the mind either. More so, we're omniscient entity, or we are purely awareness, or purely consciousness, right? We're something much more limitless rather than limited or bounded, right? And we aren't just the body or the mind. The only reason that we are so fixated on the body and mind, and therefore identified with overly, growing that ego or creating that delusion of ego, is because we have come into a fragmentation, right? We have kind of fragmentized ourselves from one source or one consciousness into many little pieces, right? Of God, because God is that one source, or that one consciousness, right? It's God and the one consciousness, one source, the entirety of the universe. It's all the same thing. Life equals God, right? And therefore, if we are all life, because we are all life, we are all God, right? So there's no worry to ever be away from God, because the idea of being away from God or separate from God is just the ego's little delusional projections, right? Nobody is away from God. All there is God, and we are all God, right? Therefore, we are all the holy, uh, the Son and the Father, right? Um, but the ego, it's gonna tell you, and it's gonna make all these little minute efforts to pretty much continue thriving off of very low vibrational energy, because this is why it's doing this, because we're literally identified with an illusion. So we're caught in an entanglement, right? That is pretty much one of a struggle, and that struggling is that very projection of a fear, or even one of a minuteness, or one of conflict, because struggling is in a way a conflicting ness. But also the ego, it's kind of making these projections because it kind of wants to, or we want to kind of fix something that never needed to be fixed, right? Or we're seeing imperfection in that deep fragmentation consciousness, um, and we're trying to make it perfect, right? We're trying to come back into one source consciousness, one awareness, um, and and within that, there's that feeling of pain, right? Which kind of, it's complementing the struggle, the egoic struggle, right? Um, and that in itself is just a delusion. It doesn't actually exist, because the ego doesn't exist. But there's that duality there, right? With one consciousness, there comes to be a consciousness, or a fragmented consciousness, and this is the duality manifesting itself within the unified, right, or the one state. um but it's kind of just all part of the process, right? It's like we have to come into fragmentation because of the natural order of things. The fragmentation needs to take place, or so we think, because the fragmentation doesn't actually exist in itself. Only that type of shadow needs to cast itself, right? um and it's the shadow. When you're living within it, you're feeling like there's imperfections that you need to fix, right? But really it's just there's only a singular consciousness, but that feeling or that fragmentation consciousness is 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 also there, and that's the duality of it. And that's like in getting into the darker ages, where we're feeling very, very imperfect, or we're very, very fragmented in awareness. But the fragmentation is illusory, right? um and there's only one awareness, and really it's just God has fragmented, and he kind of breaks himself down into pieces. um and then it kind of gets really complex from there. And then it kind of returns back into oneself, right? Which is what we're heading into um right now, as we're going off into towards the end of time, right? Where all the fragmented pieces of God are returning into one piece, um, which can be observed right now. You can observe this everywhere. Um, if you just observe through that lenses, you're gonna be able to see that there's a fragmentation, and slowly it's kind of coming into a one awareness once again. And if you go deeper into the one awareness, if you are observing it, then you kind of get familiarity flashings, of being in that one source, or being at one with God, or one awareness, you know. And this is where it's going for everybody, right? So slowly the ego is dissolving, um, and being transcended, right? The ego is only there to deal with pain of fragmentation from one source, right? But it's a delusion in all actuality, because it doesn't actually exist. It's a very minute dimension of the mind, right? And there's a lot of false ego as well, right? By this I mean you're identifying. If you are forming any identification, it needs to be one of universal oneness, rather than of like a physical body, right? Or anything like this. So the false ego is mostly one that is very, very minute in its signature, or in its essence, or in the identification itself. And if there is going to be, if you are identifying with anything, it needs to, or it should be, one that is more unary, right? Or universal. And you form, or you can come into that identification through experience, which which comes through the dissolution of the more false ego, right? Which is the more minute ego, the one that is of the body, or even maybe thought, right? And the body, um, completely dissolving away the ego, is easily attained or easily achieved through immersifying yourself in the experience totally. Okay. Um, very, very simply, right? And this, you can reach this through just straight observation, um, without forming any thought of what is being observed, right? And then becoming the observation, and that's how you can get into more pure states of mind, right? Which can allow you to have deeper and deeper experiences, where the ego is just at that level of experience is it doesn't exist anymore, right? So that's gonna be it. I do thank everybody for watching. Once again, peace out, one love, and have a great evening.